The smoky room we created in the previous video takes quite a while to render right from the scene. What we want to do is split the background and the smoke into separate layers. To do this, the first thing we'll do, and is stop this render, is select the smoke volume we created and turn off its visibility. So it renders without the smoke volume. Now we have our base layer. So we need to create a separate layer for the smoke volume. Normally you want to create two layers, one for this and one for the smoke layer, but for now we'll just show you how to create the smoke layer. We are going to switch the interface to rendering standard. That gives me the render setup window. And in the render setup window I'm going to create a new layer, which will be smoke. It's empty. If I switch to the layer, you'll see it's completely empty. And I'm going to add a collection, create a collection called objects. And all the objects in the scene, except for the smoke volume, are going to be added to this collection. You just middle mouse drag them from the outliner into the collection. I forgot to get Andy in there, so let's also get Andy in there. So all the objects are now in my scene. The idea behind creating this layer setup is to not have the shaders on all the objects evaluated every time the volume shader is called. So we want to replace the shaders in this scene with a single black shader, a shader that simply returns a single color without any calculation. For that we need to create a material override. The override material, so we could call this override make black, and we can create a new override material, and we're going to use a Arnold shader that is called the AI flat. AI flat returns a single color. Let's make that color black. Now my scene will render completely black. I also need some lights in this layer, but I don't want all the lights in the layer. I turned off in the options include all lights in each render layer by default. This allows you to choose which lights you want in each layer. By default this option is on, so I turned off include all lights in each render layer by default. I'm going to create a new collection for the lights. And I'm going to include the lights that I actually want to interact with the volume. And that's the lights outside and this little area light under the counter. There is another way of doing this, but this is a really easy way to do that. There's a separate light editor, but that's messy. So now it should render, but all the shaders return black, so you won't see much. Actually, I do not want my sky dome in there because that's messing up the window out there. Okay, so I got just my directional light and my area light and the thing. Those are the main lights I want in my volume. So now let's create another collection for the smoke volume. And we're just going to add the, there it is, it's hidden, the smoke volume. I'll throw it in here, but it's hidden so we won't see it. That's why we need an override. You can add overrides right here, and you can drag attributes from the attribute editor. We want the visibility overridden, so I'm going to take the visibility, middle mouse drag it into the overrides. Now there's a visibility override. If we select it, we can turn on the visibility for the smoke volume in this layer, and in the main scene, the visibility is still turned off. And if we go back to the smoke layer, the visibility is on. And if we're lucky, it will now just render. And it does. We get just the smoke with the two lights that I selected. This turns out to be way too dark. I think I need to put in the doorway light as well. So I'm going to go to my lights, get the doorway light, throw that into the scene just to have some more fill into my scene. And we get a nice, albeit pretty dark, volume render that we can use to then overlay onto the scene. And we do not get the light from the little light that's up there as a backlight on Andy. You can barely make out Andy right here. I can make it a little bit brighter so you can see this is what actually renders. That is what we'll be using in the composite, which is the next step of the process.